Thank you, Irma. That was lovely. Irma's been picking out some new material for us, and we really appreciate that. I like the background to the slides, too. It's very nice. Thank you. Is anybody giving any big gifts this year? Oh, don't raise your hand because the person next to you might notice. What are you expecting to receive this year? Is anybody else warm in here, or is it just me? Yes. Maybe we could cool the air a little bit. Thank you. Thank you, John. What do we look forward to giving and getting at Christmas? It's always more appropriate to discuss what we're looking forward to giving than what we're expecting and planning to get. Talking about what you're planning to get is something children do. We grow out of that. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Thank you. Sorry. All right. So our text today is about an interesting gift. If we can turn to Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19 and verse 11. 19:11. Now it's a parable, and we want to start with the context of the parable. And the context of the parable is this. Now as they heard these things, he spoke another parable because he was near Jerusalem and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. So we got to look at the context. The context has two becauses in it. It says, because he was near Jerusalem and because they thought that the kingdom of God was going to come immediately. Remember, we've talked several times about how the Old Testament Jews, the Jews around Jesus' time, were getting it wrong with regard to the prophecies of his first coming. And I really can't blame them, because if I look at the prophecy of the Old Testament, they're all kind of mixed up. It talks about Jesus coming. It talks about a restoration of the throne. It talks about a restoration of Israel. It talks about a bunch of stuff that you might misinterpret to think was on the first coming, on the Advent, and not on the second coming. So they were a little confused about all this. And I can't blame them. And I wonder sometimes how confused we'll be when the very final events start to transpire. Will we be confused about what's happening because we thought it would happen just precisely this way, and maybe we put too fine a pencil on it? The Jews certainly did put too fine a pencil on it, to the extent that they rejected the Messiah when he came. I often think about that in the terms of the spirit of prophecy. There are a lot of people in this world that say, well, you know, there were prophets in the old times, but there aren't any prophets now. And therefore, they take the opportunity to blanket reject every prophet in the latest days. And yet, there is prophet, and there is a prophet, and there are prophets in the latter days. And it says, your sons and daughters will prophesy. And so we need to recognize and test the prophets by their own words and by the scriptures. Well, here it says that they thought that the end was going to come. They thought that Jesus was going to ride into town and he was going to solve everything. I met a guy over here this morning. He won our prize. His name's Dylan, but he never heard of Matt Dillon. He used to ride into town, and he used to make things right, didn't he, Matt Dillon? Marshall Matt Dillon. I hadn't thought about him in a long time until I met Dillon this morning. Had a flashback. Okay. So it says they expected the kingdom to come. And so he said, let me tell you a story. He said, a certain nobleman went to a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. Now it's interesting. This is in the days of nobility. There's still some of that in Europe, but it's a dying art, this whole nobility thing. People were born to kingship, weren't they? They called it the age of kings. And this guy, apparently, in this story, was born as a prince. But apparently, he had not yet ascended to the throne, and he was going off to receive his throne. And so he called his servants, and he delivered to them 10 minas, and he said to them, do business until I come. Now this story is told in two different ways by Jesus, once here and once in Matthew. Over in Matthew, we find it in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 14. And you remember in that story, there are 3 servants, and one gets, let's see, it says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his servants and delivered his goods to them. And one he gave 5 talents, and another he gave 1, each according to his own ability, another 2. And immediately he went on a journey. Now, what is a mina? In Luke 19, it says he gave him a mina. What's a mina? Everybody got the same thing in the Luke story. What's a mina? A mina is about 1/4 to 1/3 of a year's earnings. So think of whatever you earn in a year, and think of a lump sum cash prize. And this lump sum cash prize, he says, this isn't your money, this is my money. And then he gives them a specific instruction, and the translation of this one is pretty accurate. I looked it up. Do business with this until I come. Okay, so imagine somebody gives you a third of your annual income. If that's too hard, think of a quarter. If your math isn't up to a third, go with a quarter of your annual income and says, do business with this until I come. How many of you are old enough, Seventh-day Adventists, to remember investment, 13th Sabbath investment offering? Anybody? A few. Good. Good. Back in the old days, they used to take roll. I guess they still do in some Spanish-speaking churches. They used to take roll at Sabbath school. And how many of you, I won't ask how many of you come to Sabbath school. So they used to take roll at Sabbath school, and the way they took roll is they would have the Sabbath school superintendent, Steve, are you here? Sabbath school superintendent stand up in front, and they would ask certain questions. Y'all remember this? How many of you studied your lesson every day? Raise your hand. Right? And then they would ask, how many of you made a visit this week? Raise your hand. And they said, how many of you gave a Bible study this week? They asked all these questions. And then the funny thing they did was on the first Sabbath of the quarter, I-Day, keep this in mind, on the first Sabbath of the quarter, they would have you write down an investment offering goal. And some people would take $20 and they say, I'm going to buy cherries because it's cherry season, and I'm going to make cherry pies, and I'm going to sell them to my friends, and anything that I get, I'll give as a 13th Sabbath investment offer a quarter from now. Mary Ellen's mother used to always do her fig tree. And she said, I'll give a dime for every fig this fig tree produced, because her fig tree hadn't produced very many figs. And of course, she wound up owing a lot of money, because the fig tree just went crazy that year and dumped hundreds and hundreds of figs, and she had to borrow money. No, she didn't borrow money. But that was what 13th Sabbath investment offering was about. And I'm told that this church, when you were trying to buy this building, had a situation where somebody passed out money to everybody, and everybody was supposed to invest that money and bring back the gain, right? And so that's one of the ways this church was built. So here's what the nobleman did. He gave a mina. He gave a lump sum. Well, what does that mina represent in our story? A mina in this story is a gift, isn't it? I mean, it's not something they earned, and it is not something they had anything to do with. It was a gift. And the gift was really kind of an opportunity. So what does this mina represent for us? I want to suggest that it represents a tool. Anybody here work with tools? I know that Mike isn't here. He left. Mike has a laboratory and he has tools. David has a laboratory. You have tools in the laboratory, right? You call them instruments, I suppose, but they're still tools, right? I have a tool here in my hand, right? This is a tool of the gospel, isn't it? And I guess if you really want to get down to it, perhaps a tie is a tool too. I don't know. Some of you are without your tools today. What are your tools? What tools has God given you? What are your gifts that you've brought this week? I don't want anybody to be confused. There's all this confusion about the difference between spiritual gifts and spiritual and the gifts of the Spirit. Those are two different things, and we'll talk about that some next year. We're going to have a little series on that. But what are your gifts? Do you have a gift? You know, I think sometimes that the ability to cook is a gift. Now, that may not be an original equipment gift. That's an aftermarket gift. It's one you learn, and it's one that some people can learn. Edsel has a gift, don't you? Edsel has a gift. It doesn't take very much. Edsel can be in any group, and music starts to erupt out of the group, right? And Edsel can accompany anybody, anytime, anywhere, in any key, and almost with any instrument. He's got a gift, right? How about you? Do you have a gift? Is there something that God has gifted you with? Do you have the ability to make people comfortable? Do you have the ability to visit people? Do you have the ability to talk to people? Do you have the ability to make a meal for people? What is your gift? What gifts do you have? You might have a whole set of them. Now, this one story, everybody got the same thing. They all got a mina. The other story, they got 1 and 2 and 5. But in this one, they all got a mina. Everybody's got a mina here. I think this Awaken program that we did was a way of looking into your mina box and seeing what you've got. What have you got? What has God given you to use for his kingdom? I wish we could sit down here and make a list and we could write. And I wish that I could tell you. I wish your spouse could tell you and you could tell your spouse. Sometimes people deny their gifts. Have you ever noticed that? Some people deny having a tool. I don't have that tool. I don't have a screwdriver. Don't make me turn that screw. I remember the time that long time ago, I moved to my first apartment and I didn't have any place to put the TV. And so I went, and this was back in the beginning of this furniture that comes in a flat box, you know. Have you ever bought furniture that comes in a flat box? So I bought an entertainment center. It came in a flat box. You've never done this? And you take it up, and I opened the box, and I got out my screwdriver, and I started to screw this furniture together. And I screwed, and I screwed, and I screwed, and I screwed. And 4 hours later, I thought my arm would fall off. It literally wouldn't work anymore. It was done. I put this thing together, and it took hours, and I got it done. And I had my little apartment, and I had my TV on, and I was kind of happy with it, even though I couldn't move my arm. I figured that would heal. And then Mary Ellen and her mother came over to visit. And her mother said, "We need one just like that." And so we swung by the store and we picked up one just like that and we took it down to her house and I laid out the box in the floor and I opened the box and I said to her dad, "You know, we might want to have lunch first because this is going to take a while." And he looked at me quizzically and he walked out to the garage and he came back in with a power drill. He says, "I don't think it's going to take that long." And we put that thing together in 20 minutes. And I learned that if you have the right tool, any job is easier, right? If you have the right tool, any job's easier. We can always sing a cappella, but it's awful nice to have Edsel around. It's always nice to have David around. It's always nice to have a whole band around, isn't it? We can use our gifts, so we have to decide what they are. What are your gifts? I think every one of us has been given more than one gift, and I like to call them a toolbox. You got gifts in your toolbox. What are the gifts in your toolbox? That's question one. And I wish we had time to take a break and you think about that, but let's move on to question two. And question two is equally important. When you put together all the gifts in the toolbox, all the tools in the toolbox, when you put together all the tools in the toolbox, what does that make you? If you work for AT&T and you do installations, you're going to have wire cutters, and you're going to have wire strippers, and you're going to have electronic testers, and you're going to have this, and you're going to have that, and you're going to have a toolkit. And if I look at your toolkit, I'm going to say he's a telephone installer, right? Stacy has a toolkit for fixing copiers. I can tell by the toner in it that it's a toolkit for fixing copiers. What are your toolkits? I remember the first time I was employed by the Texas Conference was 1982. And it was after school was out, and I was assigned to work for Mary Ellen's father. And I didn't know him very well. I just met him. He's a big man, real strong, and he used to run 2 to 5 miles every day, bar none. He was a strong man. And he said to me, "What are you doing for the 4th of July holidays?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I thought I was going to get an invitation." And he said, "Well, there's been a tornado up in Paris, Texas." Anybody remember 1982 tornado, Paris, Texas? Bad tornado, tore down a lot of people's houses. He says, "We're going to go build a house for a man that lost his house up there." And that wasn't the invitation I was looking for, but that's okay. And so he gets me in his diesel Rabbit, and we drive from Keene all the way to Paris, Texas. And we get to Paris, Texas. He opens up the back of his diesel Rabbit, and he pulled out a tool belt. He put around his waist, and in the tool belt he had a hammer and a tape measure. Hickman, you've seen this, haven't you? He's got the pouches for the nails in front, and he's got the pencil and the little triangular square. Speed square, isn't that what you call that? Somebody reminded me first service of the name of that. Speed square. And Hickman, you've seen the guys. Some guys come out, and theirs is kind of, I have one. It's real fuzzy and nappy, and it's real suede leather. And it's not very well worn. When Pastor put his on, it was clear that that puppy had been used. And he knew exactly where everything was in that particular tool belt. It became a part of his body. And all of a sudden, I looked at him and I realized, oh, that guy is a carpenter. He may be a pastor too, but he's a carpenter. And when he started to drive nails and measure and cut, it was a funny thing. We had a guy that was supposed to be the project manager, and we got out to the site, and there were a bunch of cinder blocks, and there was a large load of wood. Hickman, you've been through this, haven't you? And you're going to build a house on a flat piece of ground. I swear, if it had been me alone, I'd probably taken a couple of weeks just to figure out where to put it. So the guy that was supposed to be in charge of the project wasn't the best builder on the site. The volunteers actually had more skill than he did. And he kept trying to get the foundation square. He was trying to get those bricks square by doing the diagonals. And about 45 to 50 minutes later, it was not happening. And all of these builders are standing around there going, we got to get this project going. So somebody called the head of the project and said, I think they need you over there. And when he went over there, my wife's father squared that thing up in about 1 minute. And then we built a house that day. And we built the house before sunset. It was finished. Now, we didn't do the trim on the inside, but we built the house. It was framed out, and there was a roof deck on it before sunset. We had 25 people. It was hard work. I didn't know anything I was doing. I did whatever the pastor told me to do. But if you're a carpenter, you know how to do those things. If you're a carpenter, you know exactly how to lay two 2x4s together with something in between them in order to make the right thickness to put up a header above a door. You know that sort of thing. Now, each of us have gifts like that. Each of us have skills. I don't know if there's a lot of chemistry that can be used to further the kingdom of heaven. But I do know that chemistry gives David an opportunity to talk to a lot of young people. And that's a gift, isn't it? What gifts do you have? What is your gift set? What does your toolbox make you? My father had a lot of tools. I never even knew what tools he had. I had not realized what a tool and die maker did when I was a kid. But he was a businessman when I was alive. But before that, he was a tool and die maker. And he had a storeroom out in the garage, in the carport. And the storeroom had military ammunition cans. And in the military ammunition cans, he had filled them with WD-40. And he had all of his micrometers and his spanners and his little things inside of there. And one day he took them out and showed me all of the tools of a tool and die maker. He had lots and lots and lots of tools. A tool kit, in England they call it your kit. He had a whole kit that made him able to do his job. The question is, what kit has God given you? I hope that God has given me enough of the tools of a pastor to do passably well at the job. What has he given you? Has he given you friends, influence? Has he given you people in the workplace over which you have some authority? Has he given you children? Has he given you a spouse? Maybe his gift to you is not giving you a spouse, keeping you free to go on mission. Maybe he's given you a different skill set, a different gift set. And then the last question, of course, is how does this story end? But his citizens hated him, and they sent a delegation after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. Verse 15, and so it was that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded his servants, to whom he had given the money, to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Master, your mina has earned 10 minas. And he said to him, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in very little, have authority over 10 cities. And the second came saying, Master, your mina has earned 5 minas. Likewise, he said to him, you also be over 5 cities. And then another came saying, Master, here is your mina, which I have kept put away in a handkerchief. For I feared you because you are an austere man. You collect what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, out of your own mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money with the bank, so that at my coming I might have collected it with interest? And then he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to him who has 10 minas. But they said to him, Master, he has 10. For I say to you that everyone who has will be given, and from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. But bring here those enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them and slay them before me. Now, the story in Matthew, it says that the one who just hid the money wound up in a place where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't know how the Calvinists deal with that, but it turns out that there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so the question comes, are you using the gifts that God has given you? That's the question. Now you say, well, you know, last week at the ordination, Ken Cox was there. How many of you know who Ken Cox is? He's turned out to be older now. I don't know, I didn't get any older, but he did. And he's got white hair, and he was a little bit frail. But here's a guy that's baptized thousands of people, just like Mary Ellen's father. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people he's baptized. I was with him one day when he baptized 320 people in one day. So he's baptized thousands of people. There's a temptation for me, and maybe others, to say, hey, look, I can't possibly do that. I can't possibly baptize thousands of people. Why even try? Why even try? And I want to caution you, the why even try set is going to get a harsh judgment. We have to invest what we've been given. What have you been given? And what are you going to do to invest it? I remember seeing that tool belt on my father-in-law's waist. He wasn't my father-in-law then. And I realized this guy has really used this. And it turned out that he'd built many homes. He'd built many homes all by himself. And the question is, what are we doing with the tool set we've been given? Is our toolbox used or not used? My father was a wood sculptor for a little while, and I have all of his wood sculpting tools. They're gorgeous. They're sharp. He left them sharp. They're beautiful, and they're in beautiful shape. But they're not doing any good work because I'm not a wood carver and I don't know how to use them. They are not producing anything. And the question is, are your tools producing anything or not? Are the tools that God gifted you with collecting dust? Or are they in a beautiful cabinet? I'll bet you there's at least 5 people in this room who could sing on our praise team, who could make music with us that have never done so. I'll bet there are 5 people in this room who have a gift of hospitality that have never had anybody at this church over to their house. I'll bet there are 5 people in this church who have a gift of generosity who have never given this church any money. I'll bet you there are 5 people in this church who have a gift with words, who have never written a note or a letter or spoken the right word in due season to anybody else in this church. Now let me ask you a few more questions. How many of you know how to write an email? Honestly, okay? How many of you know somebody who could be blessed if you wrote the right email to them? How many of you know how to write a letter on paper? I know it's a dying art. How many of you know how to write a paper on letter and put a stamp on the envelope and actually mail it? Anybody know how to do that still? How many of you know a person who would be blessed to receive a letter from you saying kind things and Christmas greetings? How many of you know a person who may not have gotten a letter, a personal letter, handwritten this year? You know, this book here is full of handwritten letters. Did you know that? The New Testament is just a bunch of handwritten letters. Letters written from one believer to another, and it's the foundation of the church you're coming to. The question I have is this. Have you written any letters in the last year? Heartfelt letters to somebody who could be blessed by them? I want to ask you, is there anybody here who knows how to pick up the phone and make a telephone call? Not a call about gossip, not a call about business, but a call just to encourage another person. If you know how to make that call and you don't make that call, and you could make that call, the question is, are you being this guy who hid the mina in the towel? Today, at the Christmas season, you've got no excuse. This is the perfect opportunity to call somebody and say, in the Christmas season, I was thinking about you because we've missed you. In the Christmas season, I was thinking about you because I just haven't talked to you in a while. Right here in this church in the last 2 weeks, we've had one gentleman die, and we've had another gentleman who went in the hospital with leukemia. Both are gentlemen that I did not personally know. One of them had been attending. I shook his hand every week, but I didn't really know him. And the other one passed away, used to be a deacon here. He was a head deacon at the Dallas church. But nobody here really knew him. There's 4 or 5 people in this whole church that knew him. He was a deacon here as recently as 3 or 4 years ago. And nobody knew him. I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you. Jesus said, they will know you are my followers by the love you show for one another. And the question is there a tool that you have that you're not using? Is there a tool that you're having that God has given you to reach somebody else and make a blessing out of it? I want to ask you to make a commitment today with me that you're going to make a blessing out of what God has given you in terms of influence, in terms of ability. Now, while the musicians come back up, I would like to ask if you would stand with me if you want to make the commitment that you're absolutely willing right now to say, I will either call, I will write an email to someone this week to encourage them, and for no other reason. Not your regular Christmas email. A real personal, handwritten or hand-typed email or note that says, I care about you, I've missed you, I've been thinking about you, I'm praying for you. If you're willing to commit to do that this week, would you stand with me and let me pray for you? Our Father in heaven, there are people around us who need our love. There are people around us you've given us to minister to. And you've given us the gifts. You've given us the fingers and the thoughts and the heart and the kind thoughts. But so often we leave our gifts hidden, wrapped up in a towel. We ask now that you'd help us to bring out our email lists and our letter writing lists and look for those people that we have not talked to recently. Look for those people who have attended this church in the past but are not attending now. People who used to be in our lives and are not here now. And we ask that you'd impress us with the right people to contact. And then we ask for the courage to write and to make a message for these people. And finally, we ask that your Holy Spirit would guide our thoughts, that the message we give will be a due drink of clean water at the right time. That the people who get these messages will be moved and changed. The people who get these messages will recognize that you have inspired us to bring them greetings. And then we ask, Father, that the people who are going to write these messages will follow up on them. Please help us to follow up. Please help us to maintain our relationships. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. You can be seated. Friends, let me tell you something. We live in an age of unprecedented communication. And yet we use it for the silliest, stupidest, most wanton things. We communicate with people in ways that are so simple and so shallow and so pathetic. We send them pictures of puppies and kittens, but we can't possibly be bothered to sit down and actually write them a message that says, I love you. I haven't talked to you in far too long. Can't we do something? Can't we revive and refresh this relationship? So many people that we can communicate with, but we don't. I'm pleading with you. After you make the communication that you've committed to this week, put their name on one of the days of your calendar in the next month or so to follow up again. Put their name on your calendar every month if you can, so that you can follow up on a routine basis. They will only know that you're a Christian by your love. There's one last thing I want to share with you. We have some crimes in the law, and they're called inchoate crimes. I don't know what inchoate means, but it's a big word, isn't it? Does anybody know what inchoate means? I don't know. They're crimes like conspiracy. They're crimes like possession of a weapon, where there's no real victim and nothing's ever actually happened, but we have them. And so it's a crime to have a prohibited weapon. So if you have brass knuckles, don't carry them around in your car. Don't hang them from your mirror. That's a prohibited weapon. We convict people of having a prohibited weapon, even if they don't use the prohibited weapon. I think it's a kind of a silly law, but never that. Let me ask you a question to take home today. If acting the part and the role of a Christian and using your gifts to benefit God's kingdom was a crime, could you be convicted of it?